Yes, it's a new sweater. I bought it yesterday when I bought my new sofa. Okay. Hey all. Yeah, I guess I'm supposed to be improvising these episodes. That was the plan. It simply takes me a lot less time to sit down and write out my thoughts and then let them sit and mellow, then go back and fix them up and finally read a script, than all the extra editing I have to do when I just run off at the mouth. So that's it. Back to scripting myself for now. But believe me when I say that these are my words, they're just buffed up a lot so they look shiny. That said, this episode is, of course, not what it was originally meant to be. I was on the verge of addressing a trend, USAers leaving the States and telling us the reasons why they are leaving. Being one of those USAers and having my reasons for having left the USA some 36 years ago, I thought I might have something to contribute on that front, in support of or in contrast to what I and my mate have been consuming from YouTube content creators. And for those of you only listening on the podcast, there were air quotes around content creators. Now, my expat story has always been something to do with Ronald Reagan and trickle-down economics, as well as that administration's having turned away from the 1980s HIV crisis, and just the strange situation of having a Hollywood actor become president of the United States, and the resistible rise of Arturo Ui, and of the I Sing. So, in a way, I had made myself a political exile. Or that was my story once I got to Spain. Consequently, the large work I wrote in my first months in Barcelona was initially titled An American in Exile. Once I finished the work and started typing it up to send back to a number of pen pals I had in the States, I realized that the title was not only pretentious, it had little to do with the actual story, so I trimmed it down to simply Exile. Now, 36 years post-exile, I found myself questioning the real motivations behind my having left the States for good. One can imagine trying to escape the fiasco going on there right now as I type this up, but were things really all that bad on that front, on the social, political front, when I chose to leave permanently in 1989? A perhaps more compelling reason could be found within that large work, Exile, and indeed it is there. There is little or no reference to Reaganomics in Exile. There is a great deal of reference to interpersonal relationships. And that was the compelling reason my own interpersonal relationships were unstable, unsatisfactory. I wanted to remove myself from them, to escape and start over again, which is what exiling myself was meant to do. So, to confirm this for myself, I turned to those same pen pals who had read Exile. Before leaving the States, I had developed a mailing list of around 30 or 40 people to whom I sent regular newsletters and who were also pen pals, to whom I would write letters as long as they answered a letter. As I typed up Exile, I would send a copy of the section I'd just finished, let's say chapter, though they weren't really chapters, but that doesn't matter. I would send this chapter to the first person on the mailing list along with the mailing list, with instructions that they should read that copy and then mail it to the next person on the list, and so on. The last person on the list was my mother, and she received each and every chapter of the book, so the plan worked. At the same time, I was writing personal letters to many of those people, always with the rule that I was actually answering letters from them. I would, of course, write to some out of the blue, but usually reminding them that they had not answered my last letter. In any case, thinking that someday my letters might be of interest to someone, around the time I began my personal Exile and the work titled Exile, I began writing my letters in hard-bound notebooks, typing up a copy to send to a pen pal. One of my first purchases in Barcelona was a small portable typewriter, which is still in that closet here next to the study, a relic of times gone by, used both for the transcribed copy of Exile and those personal letters. Now, reading over letters I'd written within the time frame in which I thought I might be revealing my motivations for having moved to Spain to any of my pen pals, near the end of May of 1991, I find myself writing to a friend in Buffalo, New York, foreshadowing an important change in my life in Barcelona that I was unaware of at the time of the writing, a move from one flat to another that would finally lead to my getting on that train that took me out of Barcelona and landed me more or less where I am now. I can only identify this foreshadowing because of that old 20/20 hindsight thing, and I can layer on the fact that Buffalo, New York, and that friend were my first failed attempt at self-exile. So there you have it. I was that someone who would have interest in those letters I'd written. Again, I found that foreshadowing as I was looking for my then contemporary thoughts on why I'd left the States. I only brought down 2 letter-writing notebooks for my study to my work table, covering the year up to my move and then my first 2 years living permanently in Spain. And as I perused those 3 years of letters, I did find that my true motivations were more personal and less political than I would admit out loud. But what about the other letter-writing notebooks that followed those? There are 4 of these notebooks. We'll call them notebooks 1, 2, 3, and 4. Notebooks 1 through 3 are filled to the brim. That's about 190 pages of writing in each. Here you can see what that looks like. For those of you listening to the podcast, I'll leave an image in the thumbnail. Notebook 1, covering a period between July of 1988 to April of 1990, has 135 letters with an average of 1.3 pages per letter. Notebook 2, that picks up in mid-April 1990 and covers the months up to late May 1991, has 105 letters, a drop in 30 letters, with an average of 1.8 pages per letter. Notebook 3 of August 1991 to late November 1997 contains 88 letters, another drop, this time of 17, and average length of 2 pages per letter. Notebook 4, which only has 41 pages of letters ranging from June of 1998 to the end of December 2000, contains 17 letters at 2.4 pages average length. Now, there are wide gaps in the actual calendar time represented in each of those notebooks. In Notebook 1, which covers 22 months, there were 4 in which I did not write to anyone, it seems. Notebook 2, which covers my first 14 months living alone in Barcelona, well, each of those 14 months are filled with letters, an average of 7.5 per month, with November and December of 1990 being pretty full of correspondence. Notebook 3 begins okay, but letter writing whittled down in March of 92 to 0. And then was 0 for the 4 months that I was visiting the United States and then getting back on my feet in Spain. I could say that for the period between January of 1993 to November of 1997, letter writing was not a big thing for me. It was sporadic and never more than 2 or 3 letters in any given month. Also, I'd bought my first personal computer in 1993, coinciding with that drop in letters in Notebook 3. I then switched that computer out for a newer model in 1995 when I first got internet in my home, and since then I have had access to a computer and mostly to internet continuously. So, though there were fewer letters in that notebook, there were letters on 3.5-inch floppy disks, and there were more and more emails. November 4th, 1998 to 2000. That's a real sign of the times. Writing the letter out by hand became kind of an old-fashioned way of doing things. Actually putting a letter in an envelope and mailing it out, well, I can't really say when the last one was. Though I can see in that last letter in the notebook 4 was written in pen in black ink, and that was written in December of 2000. So it's been 25 years. A grim reality also contributes to the disappearance of letter writing in my everyday life. A lot of the people I wrote letters to are no longer with us. My mother, my best friend in New York, the older man that I met in New York City, that strange woman I met at university, my Aunt Maxine, these were all people I regularly corresponded with and with whom I no longer can correspond. Then there are the people I simply lost touch with. And losing that touch was probably on my end of the deal, just as those letter-writing notebooks began to have those month-long gaps. While I was moving about trying to find where I was going to hang my hat for longer than a couple of years. It's so easy to lose track of addresses, for that last letter from a pen pal who wasn't all that great at keeping in touch anyway, to not get forwarded. And add those I stopped writing to simply because they had stopped writing to me. Still, though I hadn't received a letter for ages, I don't think I've received a letter here at my forever home. I'm not really sure I actually missed the whole letter writing thing. I enjoyed doing it, but reading through all those letters, well, not all of them, there's over 600 pages of my tightly scripted writing there, but reading through them, I'm finding myself a little embarrassed with myself. I'm seeing someone I'm not anymore, someone who is pretty insufferable. In my favor, my maid points out something that other friends have always pointed out. I'm pretty much the same person with everyone, and not at all careful with saying what I think. Or maybe it's more that I'm not all that concerned about what others think about me. That's a superpower that a lot of people don't realize they have until they are past 60 years old, but it's a superpower that I've always seemed to have. It does mean that I often speak and act in ways that probably make my life less easy than it could be, but it also means that I've always been who I am and haven't pretended otherwise in any situation with anyone I've come across. So no, I don't miss writing those long letters, typing them up, decorating the envelope, buying pretty stamps. I don't miss not hearing back from those pen pals or the disappointment when, despite my lengthy diatribes, they could only find the time to scratch out a couple of paragraphs. Wait, my mother and my best friend and that strange woman from university were exceptions. Those three wrote copious letters, but not always with the frequency I'd have liked. In the end, then, not at all a nostalgic episode about how sad it is that we don't write letters anymore, that we depend on TikTok and Facebook and Instagram. I'm pretty sure that someone is writing a letter to someone else right now, that people still use envelopes and stamps, and maybe even airmail paper. Remember that airmail paper, that lightweight, light blue paper with a delicate, almost crispy texture? Those envelopes with the red and blue diagonal lines around the edge and the words par avion in French? And just to clear it up, I moved to Spain in part because I wasn't happy with the Reagan administration, and in the other part because I was very unhappy in my then domestic relationship. I wanted to get away, and Spain was available, and pretty easy. So I simply took advantage of the circumstances, and here I am, 36-some years later. Thanks for listening. and I began sharing chapters from Exile back in Season 4. I'll leave a link or two where links belong, while I consider taking up that project again. Maybe reading the entire work for you all? It's just that it needs a lot of rewriting and editing. And please remember,
listen, like, subscribe, and share.
cheers. Testing.
You're listening to Radio Rebel.